The team is back in Barcelona from their Asian tour in Japan and South Korea, so I think it's about time that we go through some winners and losers for the first three matches of preseason. We're in episode 708 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton. I'm flying solo today because it's still that preseason malaise we're all trying to work off, a little bit of rust, and I can say some players did, some players didn't. To help me get rid of that rust for the preseason, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. Help me out with a good rating on the podcast apps. Help me out on Patreon for as low as $3, or always hit me up on social media wherever you find me. So let's get into it. The winners and losers from Barcelona's preseason tour. Let's start with the winners, and let's start with Marcus Rashford. I don't really know what the expectations were for him, at least in the preseason tour. And while he didn't absolutely blow us away, he didn't do anything wrong that didn't have me pretty tentatively excited for what he's going to deliver to Barcelona. Almost as if he was the player that we hoped that he would be or expect him to be this season as the main bench option along with Ferran Torres and the forward line. So with those limited expectations, I think he made good on them. The goal against Diego was a good sign, but I was even happier to see him both on the wing and in the middle. And both spots looked like it could work for him in positive ways under Hansi Flick. Of course, we knew he was going to be motivated, but just because he's motivated doesn't mean it was going to be a good fit. And fortunately, it does in the early going, again, very tentatively, look like it's going to be a good fit, and Hansi Flick is going to utilize him to strengthen a squad that did need depth last season. And Marcus Rashford does look like a pretty decent depth piece for Barcelona. Now, the big winner of the preseason tour has to be Gavi, because I don't know really where I'd fit him in the squad depth and all those things, but he comes out being the MVP after those three matches. He scored 3 goals more than any other player. He wore the captain's armband, which a lot of players did, sure, but he is still just 20. And in year 2 after his ACL injury, a reminder that he is still so exceptionally young. Most players at 20 are still getting better, as opposed to Gavi, who are expecting to be improving after a down season, as if that's who he was going to be forever. He was so good, I'm asking questions like, would Hansi Flick push Gavi or Pedri forward to play in the 10 in front of De Jong deeper? And is that the best midfield trio that Hansi Flick could go with? Because Gavi or Pedri have played themselves onto the field. Well, Pedri obviously has, but De Jong has also played his way onto the field, and Olmo is going to just have to sit and wait in the wings. Or can Gavi take that starting spot in the double pivot next to Pedri over De Jong? Just straight up, play the double pivot. It's Gavi and it's Pedri the way that all of us kind of dream of it to be. But De Jong has been so good in the last 7 or 8 months, he was better than Gavi last season, that is his starting spot to lose. Maybe, in theory, I don't know. It's a good problem for Hansi Flick to have 3 guys for 2 double pivot positions, with Costado also just as good, just as important, I thought, in a lot of those matches as De Jong was. Let's keep the theme with La Masia, and I've got some La Masia names to mention because I did think all the kids were generally winners on this tour, highlighted by Joe Fernandez. Hansi Flick brought him, so I figured he would get minutes, right? You don't bring a kid and have him miss Barca Athletic preseason training to take him all the way to Japan and South Korea and not want to play him. But the fact that he scored a goal in his debut and then started against Diego is much more than I expected from him. Barca Athletic had a bunch of teenagers last season, and Dro actually wasn't one of them. He played primarily with the U19s. He did train with the first team at the end of last season, so Hansi Flick had already been told about his talent and was willing to call him up to the first team. And on this preseason tour with the first team, with more talented teammates, he had a few moments where you got to see just how good he is on the ball. And now the secret is out about the 17-year-old. So when he goes back to potentially playing in the 4th division of Spanish football, how will he physically adapt to now playing against adults who technically, it might not be the highest level, but physically, yes, those are adult men against a 17-year-old boy who does look like he will still be growing into his body. 17-year-olds growing into their body, it's deja vu because Tony Fernandez, I also thought was a winner. He could have been an early loser because he would have lost his minutes to Joe Fernandez, but didn't really work out that way. They split time in different times throughout this preseason tour, and he had his chance this preseason just like he did last preseason. I thought he was Barca Athletic's most exciting player last season, and I was really just hoping to get another look at him with more talented teammates. I really like how decisive he is. That, I think, is what attracts people to him at the highest level. And the idea that it's Rooney or Tony Fernandez to back up Lamine Yamal, I think that's a question that I don't entirely care to try to answer. There could be opportunities at certain moments throughout the season for both of them. And a reminder that Rooney Bargi is still coming back from his long-term injury, and Tony Fernandez is 17. So if one or two players goes down for any bit of time on the wings for Barcelona, I like the fact that Barca can trust 2 different players to come in on the bench who are both young and exciting. We still got some Amasia work to do because Geoffrey Torrance was also a winner here. He could have just been the backup to the backup, as in Gerard Martin to back up Balde, but no, Geoffrey Torrance was good enough that Hansi Flick wanted to see what it was like to have Gerard Martin play at left center back and have Geoffrey Torrance get some minutes in multiple games backing up Balde. And for being just 18 himself and have only played 11 times for Barca Athletic last season because he was with the U19s, and when he was called up in the spring, he was dealing with some injuries, but he looked both healthy and confident, playing a really balanced game, timing his runs well, and showing that he's comfortable both overlapping and underlapping, which clearly, based on his physical profile, he's not as dynamic as Balde is, but he might be more versatile and multifaceted in terms of what you could do with him offensively. And when he is stepping into the middle of the field to underlap, as long as his positioning is right, that's going to put him in a better spot to deal with those counterattacks. Now, I would also count Guy Fernandez as another winner, and this one is probably the one you could debate me on, but I don't think he's a loser for sure. He's 17 years old. So the fact that he got to go to preseason with the first team, I still think in context, I know that he's been a big prospect. I've been talking about him now for 2-3 years. I still think getting invited as a 17-year-old to the preseason tour and getting minutes, that means that you were a winner. Because other clubs already know about him, there is quite the notion that he could be on the move, that he's too good for the fourth division, and that might be fair. And this preseason tour might have been the opportunity for him to showcase what other teams wanted to see at first team level, and he can go on loan and be real good for Barcelona when it's time for some other guys to come off the books in the next year or two. He has a lot of positional versatility, which means that you could be a master of none. That is entirely possible. But if he can use this season to have everything in between the ears catch up to his tremendous technical ability, as well as his body, which has been basically first team ready for 2 years now, you can see the growth that is very possible with him this season. And again, he just turned 17 recently. If you thought I was done with youngsters, I am not, because Rooney Bargi also I thought was a winner. Maybe less so than Dro Fernandez and Tony Fernandez, but still a winner nonetheless. After signing technically for Barca Athletic with the opportunity to play with the first team as Lamine Yamal's backup, I do think he did enough to earn that spot in the first team as a backup to Lamine Yamal. And it wasn't just a goal against Vissel Kobe. He looked very direct and confident in his actions. He's still working his way back, as I'll remind you, from that long-term injury last season. So I'm also willing to be patient with him. And as long as he's training, and he will likely be, very much like Pablo Torre last season, one of the last ones off the bench. So this season, at 19, if he gets, let's say, 20 appearances, or anywhere between 15 and 20, I still think it's just fine for Rooney Bargi, especially if the rest of the first team stays healthy, which is what we really want to see from Lamine Yamal. Please stay healthy, because this kid not only is a winner from last season, but still remains to be a winner and feels like he continues to ascend. He looks stronger and somehow more dangerous in this preseason. I don't love the way that he gave the ball away against FC Seoul, and I kind of am practicing making sure that we critically look at Lamine Yamal in the same way that we praise him for all that he does well, because aside from those two giveaways, he gave me zero reasons to worry about him this season. Yes, he did dominate against lesser competition, but some of those moves that he was pulling, especially against Daegu FC, that's going to beat anybody, whether it's in South Korea against the team in last place in the K-League or in the semifinals or final of the Champions League. Some of those moves that he was throwing out, and the fact that his body seems to physically more support some of those moves, we were worried that putting on that extra weight was going to throw off his balance a little bit or take him time to adjust. Nope. He seems to have figured it all out, and agility, if this is FIFA, is still all the way up to 100. And my final winner is Gerard Martin. I know. I'm the one who's critical of Gerard Martin a lot too, but he played both left back, and it seems like Hansi Flick is willing to throw him out there at left center back. And you know what? He didn't do too bad. In fact, I think the option that he could be the third on the left center back depth chart isn't so bad of an idea. If other center backs, as they likely will, are dealing with their fitness, because that's a problem with that entire group, and I will reiterate with that idea about him as a left center back, I'm not penciling him in a Champions League final on the 11. No, but there's a lot of matches that Barcelona plays throughout a season in the Copa del Rey and the Liga, and even some teams in the Champions League phase who may have been a little bit fortunate to get into that league phase. Those are the kind of teams that, you know what, Gerard Martin might be just fine as a left center back in those spots. As I said, I'm not saying a Champions League final. I'm saying against lesser competition, the kind of competition that I think he's just fine to play against, and maybe left center back is actually a better version of him. And now for my losers, let's add some caveats here. Barcelona did not lose on the preseason tour. They never looked close to losing, and they were regaining their match fitness against a bunch of teams that were in the middle of their seasons. So I didn't expect everybody to be razor sharp, but there are also players who weren't, like Rafinha, who unfortunately I think is a slight loser here. He didn't score in the 3 games, and now with Rashford around, he does have some competition, and that is a good thing. Yet, I still look at Rafinha saying that guy is a starter until Rashford takes the spot, because I still loved Rafinha's defensive shifts he put in, and there's no reason to believe that the goals won't come the same way they did last season. They could come in bunches, but they're going to come situationally. It's not like he's going to create these wonder goals on his own. Teammates are going to set him up, and the guy knows how to finish. I'm not worried about Rafinha. I am a little worried about Araujo, and that's carrying over from last season's fears. Araujo himself came out in the press this week and said, I am motivated, I'm ready to go. And you only really say those things if it feels like there's pushback to how well you're doing. With Inigo Martinez out in the preseason, there was a chance for Araujo to take that starting spot and leave, no doubt. But many Culers, now I don't know what Hansi Flick thinks, but many Culers thought Andres Christensen outperformed him on the tour in quite a few less minutes. So Araujo, the game that he starts, the game where he's a main feature, Barcelona let in 3 goals. They're not all his fault. You can look at the match review. I broke all that down. And I think we are too quick to just blame one guy. These goals were not just Araujo. I think Juan Garcia could have been better in the preseason tour as well behind him. But for Araujo, he's expected to be a leader, expected to be the rock in the back. Defensively, don't make mistakes. And it wasn't really the case on the preseason tour. So Araujo, if he's going to be that captain, if he's going to be that good, I expect him to take that starting job and, if anything, move ahead of Cubarsí on the depth chart. Because unfortunately, and I might get struck by lightning here, I did think Cubarsí was kind of a loser. And maybe I'll repeat that quietly. I did think Cubarsí was one of the losers on the preseason tour. I feel like he is the untouchable center back at the back, but even the injury against Daegu FC aside, he didn't play like he's untouchable on the tour. It's almost as if Inigo Martinez and Christensen had their stocks rise the most, even though they played the least amount of minutes. It's not a great sign for a defense that's supposed to be improving. As far as the midfield and the forwards, I have almost no concerns. But it's that back line, and yes, it's been fortified with a new goalkeeper, but that also might take time, and we don't even know if that guy's going to get registered. So for all the questions I have about the back half of Barcelona on the field, Cubarsí and his performance in Asia didn't really help me quell any of those fears. And lastly, speaking of guys at the back, Ter Stegen, not to say that he's a loser by not being on the tour or anything like that, but the whole thing about Ter Stegen and that saga, it doesn't really actually fit in this show, but I will say that this is a disaster for Ter Stegen and Barcelona. While the rest of the team was all kumbaya and getting closer on that tour, he was obviously dealing with the injury, is not there, and this divorce is about as ugly as it possibly could get. By the time this hits your eyes or your ears, we might know more about the fact that he's probably not going to be the main captain. And I feel like this soap opera still has a few more twists and turns with legal stuff coming. And Ter Stegen's legacy, I think he's already damaged it beyond repair in an FC Barcelona uniform. But is there just a tiny sliver of it that is salvageable? At this point, I'm really not sure. So for you to be the guy that was just supposed to be injured and put the microphone in front of your face this coming Sunday and talk through the Gamboa Trophy match, that was supposed to be the minimum that Ter Stegen was going to do as a captain, but that is something that I cannot trust him to do. So yeah, he's one of my losers after the preseason tour because we're still talking about him in a negative way throughout that entire tour. I think it's a good place to leave it because I want you to tell me, who did I miss? Is there somebody you disagree with or somebody I need to be adding to this list for any good reason? Let me know all those things. I did mention Costano. Maybe you got something to say about him. In the meantime, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow along on the podcast apps. And most importantly, I hope you're as excited as I am to kick off what should be a very exciting 2025-2026 season. So I will see you all season long. And as always, Forza Barca.